Welcome to the Data Friday. My name is Michael Olschimke. I'm the CEO of Scalefree. We run this session here every Friday, 11 o'clock Central European Standard Time, to allow you, the audience, to ask questions about data vaults, big data, cloud computing, any data-driven solution essentially is allowed. There is a form that I'll show you after the session today, but you can also raise your hand here or use the chat, the Q&A in this client if you want to raise any live questions. I'm used to that, right, from the trainings, so it's all good. But you can also use the form so I can prepare a little slide. And we received a couple of questions, so hang on. We received a couple of questions, and all of them included many questions. So I had to split it a bit, and you have to be a bit patient at the moment until your answer essentially gets answered. It's time boxed, so essentially we do recordings for popular online platforms. So it's roughly 10-15 minutes of session always. If there would be no questions at all, I will talk about the cluster. I'm inching forward, but really inching forward only. All right. So we received a question here. Let me just open it up. I'm getting confused. There you go. And this question is all about data quality in the enterprise data warehouse. Essentially, how to deal with dirty data managed in the business vault. What are the best practices for core data management, and how we essentially manage business rules, the different versions, maybe fixing business rules over time, how we manage that essentially properly in the business vault. So first of all, the first part of the question here provides you the solution already, right? So what a lot of people want to do, especially if they come from traditional data warehouse, from this traditional data warehousing where we are used to conform data on the way in, it makes sense to clean data before loading into the staging area or before loading into the raw data vault or into the core data warehouse and legacy data warehousing. Here when we are following the data-driven models, we don't apply any business rules on the way into staging or your landing zone and into the raw data vault. We apply business rules downstream after the raw data vault, in the business vault typically, but also sometimes in the information mark. That's the correct place for any business rule. And the same applies to data cleansing. In a sense, let me give you an example. And what many clients want to do, essentially, initially at least, they would like to apply either the cleansing rule before the raw data vault, or at least once they understood, well, these rules can change, they want to at least apply let's say a marker, is dirty, is bad, before the raw data vault. I would not do any of those because all of that requires some conditional logic. That's number one. And that's one of the statements in our trainings where we say, never apply any conditional logic in the way into a staging area, data lake, or into raw data vault. Now, I'll give you an example where it can break, or two examples. One example is essentially, let's say you receive some data from a source system and it has some H field, integer field. But there are certain records, around half of them, have a negative H. The other half, roughly, is a positive H. And then you say, well, negative H minus 42 can't be correct. So what you're doing is you cleanse those records or mark them as dirty, but you cleanse them essentially to be 0 or 18, 21, some default value essentially. Then on a New Year's Eve party, you meet the original developer and from the mainframe, and after one or two drinks, they open up, and then they essentially give you the truth. Back then, they say the storage was limited, quite limited, so they had to overload the field. Minus is a male of certain age, while positive values indicate females of a certain age. So we all agree it's not bad data anymore. It's ugly data, right? So we all agree on that. But it's not bad data, which means that if you would have cleansed the data and turned that into 0 or 18 or 21, now you have to reload and split the incoming data set into 2 columns. The same applies for your flags. If you just indicate dirty data, well, these dirty data flags are invalid already, right? So you have to reload them essentially. And that's the first reason why the first example, why we always apply business rules downstream, including data cleansing rules, because these rules, well, these rules can change because of your understanding of the data improves over time. With every New Year's Eve party, with every drink, you pay them, you get better understanding of the data essentially that you receive. That's number one. We also have a customer where they're processing IoT data, and they had like petabytes of data on the Hadoop cluster. And they came up with some cleansing rule. They said we would like to filter out some messages where a value in a key starts with, I don't know, 8, for example. Whenever it starts with 8, it should be cleaned because that's not valid, and everything else should be captured. So the first step thing is, I was looking at the data volumes. In my opinion, they only saved a couple of, this change or this filter only affected a couple of thousand messages. Out of petabytes, I would not even bother about it. So just apply it downstream. What could go wrong then? Well, they insisted, so we looked at it. But to be honest, I always tried to find some arguments against it, because I would always apply it afterwards. What could go wrong, right? Well, the thing is this. It's a very simple business rule or cleansing rule. Everything that starts with an 8 is erroneous and should go fill it out, and everything else is good. So the null key, the null value is clear case in their opinion. So the null key is not starting with 8, so it should be captured in essentially. Okay, good. So we're looking at already three cases. A value starting with 8, a value is not starting with 8, and a null value. And then I was like, okay, what's about the fourth case? So they looked at me and said, what kind of fourth case? It's quite simple, Mike. It either goes left or right, depending if it's starting with 8 or not. And I said, you're looking at JSON data. JSON data is a key value store, and the value might not, or the key and its value might not be given. It's not null, it's just completely missing, right? What about then? I don't know, to be honest, which left or right side this record went, but I can promise you that's what they didn't consider. So these rules, these business rules, just like data cleansing rules, might break. And that's if some data appears which is out of the expected data or the extreme values and so on, right? So that's the problem. So these business rules can break, so we move them all into the business world. That's where they belong. That's number one. So tagging of dirty data, cleansing of dirty data, all that belongs into the business world. All right, what's the best practice for correct data management? So in reality, in most projects where this becomes a larger topic, which is true in many projects, to be honest, what we do is in larger settings, they have some data cleansing or data quality suite from a different vendor. And I remember one tool where they had an open database. So essentially what we've done, let me just think about this. Let me just share my whiteboard here. In larger settings. The thing is, yeah, so I remember one case. In this case, they had built essentially a user interface. They built a user interface for some database. So the idea is this: like you got a source system, and don't mention here what the color. So you got some source system. You stage the data. You got your raw data vaults, and then your business vault, and then you curate your information mart. So that's the typical architecture essentially in Data Vault. Now, in this case, what we've done is you would typically, for your information marts, for your reports, you use the cleans data. So you put some business rules in place that cleans the data, remove duplicates, and so on. And then we created what we called a quality mart. This quality mart, essentially, instead of cleansing the data on the way out, it will essentially pick up only those records which are bad or ugly and report on those records. So this one essentially contains the detailed records that should be reported on and provided to the data steward. They get a graphical user interface for DQ. And this is essentially being displayed in the graphical user interface. What kind of bad data do you have? So they could mark these, typically in the best case, it would go to the source system, fix it in a source system, or leave some comments why this is not a bad record, why this is an exception to the basic business rule. And then this graphical user interface was essentially storing the comments and the indicators, the checkboxes and everything else in some database, DQ database. This, on the other hand, became then an input for the data warehouse, a data source, which means that all these comments, all these markers, checkboxes, which is correct, what is not correct, became data in the raw data vault here, somewhere here. And then we could use those comments, those checkboxes, the markings, we could use all that as an input to feed into the business rules for data cleansing, essentially filtering out the exceptions to the business rule, to the data cleansing rule. So that then become input for the data quality cleansing rule. essentially made it into the report because apparently they marked it as correct. So it has to be processed by the business rule, and filtered out in the DQ report because apparently they marked it already. So at least for the current set of open cases, it wouldn't be reported anymore, right? So that's I would say a full-fledged or bigger installation. This graphic user interface here, in this one particular case, I remember they built this manually. It was essentially some on Oracle with these Oracle Apex forms and everything else. In other clients, I remember in one larger setting, they had a DQ application by a different vendor, which with an open database. So essentially, we create a quality mart, fed the data or the results into the DQ tool, and then the DQ tool was used to handle the comments and everything else. And then we could access the source data set again from the DQ tool from the different vendor, and then feed that as a data source into the raw data vault again. So that's the architecture side of the house essentially. All right. So that's a typical scenario from a project, or from two projects actually. All right. So that's how we do the data management in a round trip essentially. The business rules, versions, fixes, how can we manage them or manage them properly essentially? The thing is this, for every business rule and its version, so we consider data cleansing rule just as a business rule, to be honest, right? So there's nothing special about it. Well, first of all, what we do is, so from the book, again, you have the staging area, you got some source systems here, you got a staging area, and then we have the raw data vault, and then we have the business vault. Well, first of all, in the book, we have only one business vault. There's a schema called biz, and that's essentially being used for the business vault entities. In most projects, what we do is we have multiple business vault schemas. First of all, we divide them by function. So there might be a BV for sales, marketing, and so on. Because the thing is this, when you consider the revenue KPI, for example, every function might have a different understanding of what the revenue KPI is. I don't like it, right? So, and I would like to, if they would consolidate these KPIs, but in reality, we in the database team, we have to implement all these different KPIs and their definitions. And this way, we can essentially structure it a bit better and also use that for security. I give you only access to the KPIs from sales if you're in the sales department and so on, right? And then we also often have what we call a data quality DQ, or messed up, sorry. One second here. Business vault DQ, where we send, the thing is this, these data cleansing rules, you want to reuse a lot. They shouldn't be required to be used, right? So you could have a sales business rule that essentially implements its own data quality or data cleansing rules, or uses raw data, the dirty data essentially. But then a lot of business rules that you use for data cleansing, they are highly being reused. So what we do is we create just one more schema, one more business vault schema called data quality, where we leave those, or where we provide those data cleansing rules, all these compute satellites, the same as links for data cleansing, and you're free to use them. So in reality, it's not its own schema where everything has to go through, right? It's the schema is parallel to the other schemas. And if you build your own business rule in the sales business vault, you're free to choose whatever you want from the raw data vault, from the DQ business vault, or from the sales business vault, essentially. That's a rough idea. That's how we organize it. And then we use it for the different information marks, essentially. That's the idea. That's number one. That's how we organize these business rules, these data cleansing rules. And then we typically require for every business rule that there must be some documentation. Either you have some governance suite where you can document your business rules. So then you also have an identifier for the business rule. Or you just, if you don't have that, you just go for a wiki, conference, whatever. In this wiki, you create one page per business rule where you document that, how to convert currencies and so on. And this wiki page is then being used in the business vault as the record source or the identifier from your data governance suite. I would consider tiny URL lists, right? So have a short URL service where you reduce the size of the wiki page. of the wiki URL. But that becomes the record source, because think about this. What is the record source otherwise? I mean, in the raw data, it's clear. It's the data lake or the source system where the data comes from. But in the business vault, you start mixing and matching data from different source systems, right? And wrangling everything through. So what's the record source? Well, it's the business logic that generates the results in your business vault entity. And the same applies for data cleansing. Somewhere there must be described what you're doing here, right? So what's the data cleansing operation you're performing here in this entity? So refer to this wiki page or refer to this data cleansing identifier, whatever you have. And that becomes the record source in the satellite or in the hub in the link. That's the other thing. And then when you have different versions, we typically in our naming conventions, we have an indicator for the version of the data vault entity. In the raw data vault, that makes no real sense. So typically, if it's version 1, we omit the version indicator in the naming convention of the satellite or of the hub and link. But for the business vault, it makes sense. If you modify a business rule, you could, from an auditing perspective, just offload those old versions of the satellite into configuration management, into Git, for example. And if the audit comes in, and if you have to prove if you have to rebuild, let's say the report from 2 years ago or something, then in the worst case, you have to recreate the satellite and rebuild the report. Auditing-wise, it's okay. You could even print it on paper whenever you're done with the old version and keep it on a stack of paper and give it to the auditor, right? The problem is it's not really convenient. In the best case, you have all these old versions live available in your data warehouse. And for this, we have a version indicator in the business vault entity, and the version indicator increases essentially whenever we modify the business rule. And that allows us to have all these different versions of the business rule, the old one, the new one, the current one, the next business rule, all of these different data vault entities implementing all these different rules all in one place live in the data warehouse. And then for the information mart, you might have an old information mart for the old reports that still uses the old version of the business rule. But then for the current information mart, you're using essentially the current set of business rules and ignoring the old ones. That's the idea, essentially, how we keep everything available. And you as a user have more choice which version you want to use. That's how we deal with this in banks, for example, in audible scenarios, audible environments, where the audibility should also be convenient, essentially. That's the idea. All right. That's essentially the answers, the business rules, the versions, and same applies for fixes. As long as you did not deliver the report, and now you have to fix the business rule, it's all good. You can just fix it. But as soon as you deliver the report to an end user, you have to maintain your versioning, essentially. So you can't just fix the business rule and business vault entity and then ignore it. You have to essentially create a new business vault entity for the fix, essentially. That's at least in an audible environment, that's the requirement, essentially. All right, cool. Good question. Yeah, thanks for that. All right, if you have a question like this, first of all, remember Data Dreamland conference coming up from September 13th to 14th, 2 days. I know the speaker list already, very interesting speaker. Check them out on our website, scalefree.com, right? I would love to see you in person. It's only in person this time. We want to test it, give it a shot. And it looks very promising. So come over if you have a chance to Hanover. I know it's not Las Vegas, but hey, Hanover, the thing is, we're there, right? So the whole Data Vault team, the Scalefree team will be there, customers will be there, vendors will be there, interesting speakers. Check out the website at scalefree.com to check out the speakers and the dates, the location, and I would love to see you there. If you have a question you want to submit, go for it. Use this form here, https sfr.ee/dvfriday to submit your questions. Yeah, include everything. It's what is required. If you have some drawings you want to add or team pictures, always say that. Add them, upload them. It's all good. And yeah, I'm going to schedule them in. At the moment, we are not filled, but we have some questions at the moment. But keep shooting, right? So yeah, fill the backlog here. All right, cool. Thanks for joining today, guys. And I hope you enjoy the summer, the rest of the summer. And yeah, see you hopefully next Friday, next week. Enjoy the weekend. Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining today. If you'd like to discuss this further, give us a call on the number below here, and we're happy to discuss this with you. See you next time. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.